total accuracy.
One of the most important pieces to any bolt-action rifle is the trigger. We were looking at different trigger designs that had come out from our competitors to try to figure out which was the best way to make a new trigger. We looked at some of the different gimmicks that were offered on rifles, and our R&D team decided that we didn't like these gimmicks that were added to the trigger. We wanted to build the best trigger available through superior engineering. And in that light, we went with a 3-lever trigger. What the 3-lever trigger does is allow you to have a very light yet safe trigger mechanism.
The Feather trigger is a 3-lever trigger, which enables you to keep some of the largest sear engagement in the industry and make it feel like you've cut that in half. Using leverage, it allows you to get rid of twice the amount of sear engagement with only half the trigger movement.
We knew that both performance-wise and shelf appeal, that if a customer wasn't able to take this rifle off the shelf and dry fire it and say, that trigger is awesome, that's the best trigger I've ever felt off a factory rifle, we knew that we wouldn't be where we needed to be, because that's an area of the industry that's very competitive right now. So we knew we had to beat people when it came to designing the trigger.
What makes this trigger so unique and excellent is everything's chrome plated and highly polished, not only for corrosion resistance but also for wear and smoothness, so that you have truly an excellent trigger with no take-up, no creep. It's very, very smooth.
What we had to be able to accomplish is we had to have a trigger that was safe and would pass all of our safety and security testing, but also would embody all of the things that most people think of when they think of a good trigger. When most people think of a good trigger, what they want to be able to do is they want to be able to put their finger on the trigger piece and start to apply slow, steady pressure and eventually have the trigger break and the gun fire without any perceived movement of the trigger at all. You just keep applying pressure, and once you get up to a certain weight, the trigger breaks. In order to accomplish that, you can't have a lot of take-up, which is the movement of the trigger before you actually start unsearing the fire control system. And so that was one of the requirements that the Feather trigger had to have. It had to have 0 take-up. And there's a spring on this trigger that maintains contact between this finger piece and the trigger sear at all times. So no matter what happens, as soon as you put your finger on there and start applying force, that force is transferred into the fire control system and you're doing work to unsear the rifle.
Another highly improved feature of the X-Bolt's Feather trigger system is the interface between your sear and your firing pin. That interface used to be at 45 degrees. Meaning that as your firing pin was forward, it rests on your sear at an angle of 45 degrees, which creates kind of a wedge effect and pushes your firing pin to the top of its cavity in the bolt. And as you unsear, that drops and introduces what's known as a porpoising effect of your firing pin. As it drops from that 45 angle and comes down and settles in, it kind of porpoises toward your firing pin, which gives you inconsistent indent into your primer as far as the angle that your firing pin hits it, and also slows it down a little bit. One thing we were able to do with the X-Bolt is we created a near vertical interface between your sear and your firing pin. And what this does is it allows it to be easier to guarantee in a safe position, but also it eliminates, there's no more of that lift or that wedge effect on your firing pin when it's seared up. You have that heavy firing pin spring trying to shoot that firing pin forward. It just holds it at a right angle, and then as soon as you drop that sear or unsear the rifle, a sear drops out of the way and your firing pin just moves straight forward. You don't have that porpoising effect, giving you better lock time and more consistent indent in your primer. And as anyone knows, consistency translates directly to accuracy, which is why the X-Bolt truly is one of the most accurate, if not the most accurate, rifle on the market today.
Basically, it amplifies the motion from your finger into that secondary trigger sear piece so that your finger doesn't actually have to move as far as the sear is engaged. Basically, you want as little motion in all aspects of pulling the trigger as possible. And so that last part of it, the amount of movement that the trigger has after the gun is fired, is what's called over travel. And so you have to be very careful to have a surface that trigger hits against, so that you don't have a situation where you've got all this play in the trigger after you've fired the rifle.
The Feather trigger, again, is one of the best on the market, if not the best, in a sporting rifle. The reason being is our 3-lever trigger system. Along with that, we chrome plate most of our internal components for a great surface finish. This allows there to be very little drag on the trigger. You can feel no creep in the trigger, and the over travel is adjusted from the factory so that it is virtually zero.